Like most people, I tend to judge TikToks within a second or two. Usually, it's the rapid fire, all guns blazing clips that catch my attention, silly sketches, OTT influencers, and the like. But this video stood out for the opposite reason. The audio was silent and the image didn't really move at first. It was shot from the POV of someone sitting up in bed and showed the bottom of a bed frame, a TV stand, a flat screen, and a lamp. It was totally unremarkable except it was filmed in my bedroom. I was looking at my bed, my TV stand, my lamp. At first, I thought my boyfriend had posted it, maybe by accident, as it was so boring. But the account username was different, a meaningless stream of numbers that looked like one of those auto-generated passwords, and there was no profile picture. Obviously, I freaked out. It felt so intrusive. I tried to think of the last time we'd had people around, when someone could have done this, and who would want to. The video was still playing as I processed these thoughts, and I noticed that the audio wasn't actually silent and the volume up. I couldn't hear much at first, but when I strained my ears, I picked up the sound of someone breathing. It wasn't performative, quite the opposite. It was as if the person recording the video was trying to be quiet. It sounded a bit like a man, but I couldn't be sure. I stood up, and as I did, the perspective of the video shifted. The camera panned from the TV stand to my dresser, which was propped against the bedroom wall. The camera bobbed up and down, in time with the person's breathing, and the footage blurred slightly. Eventually, the image came into focus. I stopped breathing. I could see my makeup scattered across the surface of the dresser, a small square of light from our bedroom window, and the radiator running along the wall. There were 3 bits of laundry hanging off the radiator. One of my bras, a pair of Mike's pants, and an old, ratty t-shirt I slept in. Unremarkable, normal, yet truly terrifying, because I'd held those clothes in my hand that very morning. I draped them on the radiator less than 2 hours ago, and then I saw it, a small pink button in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. It contained a single word, live. I must have held my breath for a full minute. All of my energy, every fiber of my being was focused on listening, straining to hear movement coming from upstairs. Our flat is small, 3 rooms downstairs and 2 on the 2nd floor. I was lying on the sofa in our living room, which has a view of the staircase. If the intruder moved, I would hear them. I glanced at the video again. The footage was still, almost like a photograph. A bird flew past our bedroom window, and I almost screamed at the sudden movement. The person holding the phone didn't flinch. I told myself that the footage could have been taken that morning, and if so, it was most likely Mike's doing. He'd probably launched a new account. The idea that someone was upstairs seemed impossible. I'd been working in the downstairs office all morning, so I would have seen someone come in. All of the windows upstairs were closed, and if the intruder had broken one of them, I would have heard it. This calmed me slightly, but I was still terrified. I needed to know for sure if the footage was live or not. I looked around the room for something that'd make a noise loud enough to be picked up by the microphone upstairs. I thought about dropping a heavy book on the floor or even calling out, but eventually decided that playing some music would be a better idea. Slowly, I stood up and walked over to our record player. I felt incredibly weak and shaky and almost dropped the record whilst removing it from its sleeve. The footage didn't change. With shaking hands, I pressed the play button and retreated into the far corner of the room. The music started off slow, but almost immediately I could hear it, a horrible tinny echo being picked up on the intruder's phone and replayed through my speaker. Without thinking, I ran across the room and turned the record player off. Even now, I don't know why I did this. I think the horrible echo was just too much. The house was deadly silent after that. I looked at my phone. My hand was shaking and I was struggling to focus on the video. I almost screamed when I saw that the intruder was on the move. The camera swung from the dresser to the doorframe and appeared to zoom in. It took me a moment to realize that whoever was recording was walking towards the landing. I was crying now, and my chest was jerking up and down as I tried to control my breathing. I tried to think clearly, but one thought pushed all others aside. There's someone in the house. There's someone in the house. There's someone in the house. I probably should have closed the app and called the police, or Mike, or just ran for the front door, but I couldn't tear myself away from the feed. Almost without thinking, I called out, "What do you want?" My voice was horribly loud and broken. The intruder stopped. I pressed myself against the wall and inched towards the hallway, horribly aware that my bare feet were squeaking on the wooden floorboards. I was staring at my phone the entire time. As I reached the carpeted hallway, I saw the intruder moving again. Whoever it was took one step forward and then another. He or she was right above me now, at the top of the stairs. I clamped my hand over my mouth to muffle my sobs and block a scream. I crept forward, and the intruder followed suit, descending one stair at a time. I was very close to the front door now, only 5 or 6 feet away, but I was terrified that if I ran or made a sudden movement, the intruder would rush down the stairs and grab me. Our front door was double locked, and if I fumbled the key, I would be caught. So I stood in silence for a moment. I looked at my phone. The picture was frozen again. For a second, I thought it had glitched or that the video had been paused. And then I heard a noise, a sound I'll never forget as long as I live. It was a hollow sound, musical almost, which reminded me of someone running a wand along a xylophone. It took me a moment to place it. Someone, whoever was up there, was running a finger along the banisters. I screamed. I didn't know I was capable of making such a sound. It filled the narrow corridor and seemed to swallow me whole. I felt it pushing against the roof of my mouth, tearing at my throat. The shock of the scream broke my trance. I surged forward and grabbed at the door. Jerking the key to the right and yanking at the latch, I fell out into the street. I didn't look behind me, just ran to the end of my road, around the corner and towards the station. Several people stared at me, some with concern, but I didn't stop. I focused on getting as far away as possible. Eventually, when my lungs burned and my kidneys ached, I collapsed into the doorway of the local library. I stumbled inside and followed the signs for the public toilet. When I was safely locked inside a cubicle, I looked at my phone again. It was clammy with my sweat and tears. I'd accidentally swiped away from the video and realized that I didn't have the strength to reopen TikTok. I don't remember exactly what happened next. I leaned against the cubicle door and sobbed for at least 5 minutes, maybe longer. Then I called the police, and after that, Mike. I didn't return to the house until the police were on site. When I arrived, Mike was waiting. He put an arm around me and we walked into the flat together. Foolishly, I'd expected the police to have sent a SWAT team, but they were only 2 officers sitting in our living room. They told me that no one had been in the property when they'd arrived, but that they believed my story and would investigate. I tried to show them the video, but it was gone, along with the user profile. Mike and I stayed in a hotel that night while the police dusted our flat for prints. They didn't find any, nor did they find any footprints or DNA. I was starting to think the whole thing was a hallucination until one of the officers made an observation. There's a small door in our bedroom that leads into the eaves. It had been open when they arrived. Turns out this passage leads directly to a similar door in our neighbor's flat. This was also open when the police found it. Our neighbors were on holiday the day I discovered the video, and there was no sign of a break-in. To this day, we don't know how the intruder got into our neighbor's property. Our landlord has agreed to build a wall to subdivide the eaves, but I don't think we'll be returning to our flat anytime soon. I contacted TikTok to try and find out who posted the video, but they told me they wouldn't be able to help without a username, which I don't remember. I've since deleted the app. I grew up in a quaint, little town where the biggest excitement was the annual summer fair. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and nothing much ever changed, until the night the flicker came. It started as a local legend. The elders would whisper about it, cautioning children to be indoors before dark. The flicker was said to be a spectral entity that appeared as a brief flash of light, often glimpsed out of the corner of your eye. Most dismissed it as superstition, a story to keep kids from wandering the streets at night. But those who had encountered it spoke of it with a hushed dread. I was 17 when I first saw the flicker. I was walking home from my friend Alex's house, the night air cool against my skin. The streetlights cast long shadows, and the only sound was the distant hum of cicadas. Then, out of nowhere, a flash of light to my left. I turned, but there was nothing there, just the same empty street. Shaking my head, I convinced myself it was just my imagination and hurried home. The next day, Alex was absent from school. Concerned, I decided to visit him after classes. His mother answered the door, her eyes red from crying. Alex had gone missing during the night. There was no sign of a struggle, no note. He had simply vanished. The town was abuzz with speculation, but no one could explain his disappearance. Over the next few weeks, more people began to vanish, always at night, and always preceded by a sighting of the flicker. It wasn't long before the town was gripped by fear. One evening, as I sat in my room trying to make sense of it all, the lights began to flicker. My heart raced as I stared at the bulb, willing it to stay lit. Suddenly, the room was plunged into darkness. In the pitch black, I saw a brief, bright flash in the corner of my eye. I turned slowly, dread pulling in my stomach. Standing in the corner of my room was a figure, barely discernible in the darkness. It seemed to be made of shadows, its form shifting and flickering like a candle in the wind. Its eyes, however, were piercingly bright, almost blinding. I was frozen in place, unable to move or scream. The figure spoke, its voice a whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You must leave. This town is mine." The room suddenly flooded with light as the power returned. The figure was gone, but the terror lingered. I knew I couldn't stay. I packed a bag, left a note for my parents, and took the first bus out of town. For years, I moved from place to place, trying to escape the memories of that night. But the flicker was always there, lurking in the shadows, a constant reminder of the terror I had fled. I tried to warn others, but no one believed me. They thought I was crazy, haunted by a figment of my imagination. One night, as I sat in a dingy motel room, the lights began to flicker. I knew what was coming. I had run for so long, but the flicker had finally caught up with me. The room went dark, and I saw it again, the shadowy figure with eyes like burning coals. "You cannot escape," it whispered. "Your fate is sealed." This time, there was no running. I stood my ground, my heart pounding in my chest. "What do you want from me?" I demanded, my voice trembling. The figure moved closer, its form flickering and shifting. "Your fear," it said simply, "your despair." I realized then that the flicker fed on fear, drawing strength from the terror it instilled in its victims. It wasn't just a malevolent spirit, it was a parasite, thriving on the darkness within us. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "I won't be afraid of you anymore," I declared. "You can't control me." The figure paused, its eyes narrowing. For a moment, it seemed uncertain. Then, with a final, blinding flash, it disappeared. The lights came back on, and I was alone in the room. The flicker was gone, but the scars remained. I knew it would always be out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the next person to succumb to its terror. But I had faced my fear, and in doing so, I had weakened its hold on me. I returned to my hometown, determined to help others overcome their fear. I shared my story, and slowly, the legend of the flicker lost its power. The town began to heal, and the disappearances stopped. Years later, as I walked through the now peaceful streets, I caught a brief flash of light out of the corner of my eye. I turned, but there was nothing there, just an empty street, bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun. The flicker would always be a part of our history, a reminder of the darkness that lurks within us all. But as long as we faced our fears, it would never hold power over us again. I was sinking deeper into debt when I stumbled upon the invitation, an old, crumpled note tucked into the corner of my favorite dive bar. It promised a poker game unlike any other, with high stakes and secretive players. As a man accustomed to the highs and lows of gambling, I couldn't resist the temptation, even though my luck had been nothing but bad. The address led me to a decaying mansion on the outskirts of town, its once grand facade now weathered and crumbling. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy with the scent of mildew and the weight of lost fortunes. The room designated for the game was a forgotten ballroom, its opulence faded and tarnished by time. A grand oak table dominated the center of the room, surrounded by players whose faces were concealed behind elaborate masks and ornate costumes. They exuded an air of mystery and menace that sent a chill down my spine, a stark contrast to my own desperation and financial ruin. I took my place among them, my heart pounding with a mix of anxiety and reluctant hope. The game commenced in solemn silence, the only sound the shuffle of cards and the faint rustle of fabric as the masked figures studied their hands. As the night progressed, I found myself ensnared in the hypnotic rhythm of the game. The stakes were not just money, they were a chance at redemption, a fleeting hope of escaping the suffocating weight of my debts. But with each hand, my losses mounted, my chips dwindling to nothing as the masked players maintained their inscrutable silence. The room seemed to grow darker, the shadows deepening as the hours passed. I stole glances at the other players, their movements unnervingly graceful, their gazes fixed on the cards with an intensity that bordered on obsession. The masks they wore were intricate, each one a work of art, but beneath the surface, I sensed something sinister lurking, a darkness that threatened to consume us all. A sense of unease crept over me as the game wore on. The masked figures remained aloof, their voices hushed and their expressions unreadable. It was as if they were not human at all, but creatures from a realm beyond our own, hiding behind a facade of flesh and bone. In a moment of clarity, amidst the chaos of the game, I looked around and saw the truth. The masks were not mere disguises but vessels, concealing the true forms of my opponents. Beneath the veneer of humanity, their faces contorted into grotesque visages, their eyes burning with a hunger that transcended mortal desires. Fear gripped my heart as I realized the danger I was in. These were not ordinary players, they were beings from a realm beyond, playing for stakes far higher than mere money. They whispered promises of wealth and power, of dreams fulfilled and debts erased, in exchange for something far more precious, my soul. Struggling to maintain my composure, I pushed all my remaining chips to the center of the table, placing my last desperate bet on one final hand. The cards fell with a finality that echoed through the room, each flip of the card a heartbeat in the silence that followed. The tension mounted as the final card was revealed, a queen of spades. The masked figures recoiled in horror, their forms flickering and wavering like shadows cast by an unseen flame. In that fleeting moment of triumph, I knew that I had won, but at what cost? As the creatures vanished into the darkness, leaving behind only echoes of their sinister presence, I stumbled away from the table, my mind reeling from the horrors I had witnessed. The weight of the night's events settled over me like a shroud, a stark reminder of the perilous path I had chosen in my pursuit of redemption.